My name is Virginia Babb. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my life and stories that I remember and things that happened to me as I grew up, and I'm now 90 years old. I was born January 13th, 1935 in San Angelo, Texas, to Marvin Daniel and Annie Young Daniel. They had married January of 34, and I was born the next January. I was the oldest of their 7 children, and I remember a lot of things, beginning with stories that Mother and my grandmother told me about my birth. I asked Mom one time, and she said, "Well, you were born at home." And the doctor came and was there most of the night, and he kept singing "Skip to Maloo" all night long. Finally, you were born, and he and Grandma Grace Daniel assisted, and he handed you to her while he was taking care of me. And she cleaned you up and dressed you and, put an undershirt and a dress and wrapped you in a little receiving blanket and hung you on the scale like they weighed cotton sacks with, and said you weighed exactly 5 pounds. The doctor said, "You'll probably never raise her. It's cold, winter, and she's too little." But my mama said, "You just watch." And my daddy had a boot box, and I fit in it. So every morning, she said, she would light the old kerosene stove and lay the oven door down, and then she'd put me in that box and lay me on the oven, turn me around every 10 minutes, keep me warm. And I guess that was homemade incubator or isolate or whatever you would call it. But anyway, that was the story of my birth. The first things I remember when I was about 2 or 3, I remember a new baby coming, and that was my sister Gladys. And she's 2 months younger than I am. And then I remember playing in a yard on East 7th Street in San Angelo, where we had moved because the house that I was born in washed away in the flood of 1936 that went all over Texas, and San Angelo lost a lot of buildings and things at that time. My mom said that was the reason there weren't very many pictures of me as a baby, is because a lot of the stuff washed away. We did find, though, one picture that my grandma Hulda Young had of me on a horse. And then there's a picture of Gladys and me. Gladys is about 7 months old, and I'm about 2.5. And those are the only pictures of me as a baby. I don't remember too much about that house on 7th, but I do remember living at 414 East 10th, which was a house that was owned by my grandfather, Gus Young. My dad and mother and I and Gladys lived in the back apartment. My Aunt Helen, who was Mom's older sister, and her husband and child lived on the side apartment. And Grandpa Gus and the rest of their 9 children lived in the main part of the house. That was a fun time growing up there. We had a big yard to play in, trees. We watched out for the cactus, but we did have one of those cactus that only blooms like every 100 years or whatever it was, and I actually saw it bloom one time. We loved to play outside. In Texas, it was warm most of the time. We made mud pies. We played jacks on the sidewalk, played kick the can at night, or maybe even tag with the trees around. And that was my childhood growing up. My cousin Wilma Ripple was only 9 months older than me, and Frankie B., my mom's baby sister, was a year older. We were what they call the Three Musketeers. We played together. Because of the way our birthdays came, I didn't get to go to school the same year they did. And I was very devastated. I loved school, and I was so excited when I finally got to go to first grade. My first grade teacher was named Ms. Rubel. I believe it was Mary Rubel, and she was a wonderful teacher. Something happened that first year. December 7th, 1941, we were at church. The whole family had gone because one of my mom's sisters was marrying one of my dad's brothers, and the wedding was to be after church. And so we stayed after church. We had the wedding. My sister Gladys, who was 4, was the flower girl. And when we came home to the reception at Grandpa Gus's house, he turned on the radio, excuse me, because he always listened to the news. And it was one of those box radios, and we turned it on, and there was a bulletin that the Japanese had just bombed Pearl Harbor. And the men began to get angry, and the women started crying. And my sister Gladys said, "Well, I know one thing for certain I ain't never getting married." And Mother said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "Well, it makes all the men mad and all the women cry." And she said, "Honey, that's not what we're crying about. We're crying because we're going to war." We didn't know what that meant, but we found out soon. The first to leave was right from the wedding was my Uncle Lawrence, because he was already in the Army, in the cavalry. And the radio had said, "If you are on leave, report back immediately to your base." And so he left the wedding reception. And before long, all the other brothers had joined. My grandmother had 4 sons. My dad went into the Marines. Uncle Lloyd was in the Army, and Uncle Marshall joined the Army Air Corps. And Grandma had a banner in her house that had 4 blue stars in it, showing she had 4 sons that were in the service of their country. Grandma and Grandpa Daniel lived at 81 East 22nd, which was where they moved, because the house that they had been in was the one where I was born, and it had washed away. And so I didn't see them as often as I did the Young family, because we lived at the back of that. My mother was pregnant, but had not told my dad when he joined the service, and he left for the Marines. And our sister Maureen was born 7 months after he left, and she was almost 2 years old before he ever saw her. Daddy was sent immediately overseas because they discovered that he was a plumber by trade. And so they sent him to the South Pacific to help construct air base on American Samoa so that we would have fighter planes to fight the Japanese. Uncle Lawrence was sent overseas immediately and had 5 battle stars from his service, like Solomon Islands, New Hebrides, Guadalcanal, Biak, and the Philippines. Uncle Lloyd in the Army was sent to England, where he was in with the invasion force in Normandy. And Uncle Marshall was the lone survivor of a B-19 crash. And he was picked up by some natives and Papua New Guinea and later found. There's a long story about that too. But Grandma Grace took me to church one Wednesday night, which is a vivid memory as a child. It was a prayer meeting, and we were praying for people around, but we were praying for those that were in the service and the war. And Grandma said, "Get down on your knees, little girl." It was a wooden bench in the floor. She said, "We're going to pray to the Lord to end this terrible war and bring your daddy and his brothers home." And so I got down on my knees. I guess that was my first lesson in supplication prayer. Well, I remember one Saturday night in 1944 when we were all at Grandma Huldah's house, because the women gathered on Saturday nights because the men were all gone to war, and they read the letters they'd received that week to each other and talked about what went on in their lives at home with the children. We were sitting there, and the doorbell rang. My Aunt Stella, who was closest to the door, answered it, and there was a young man standing there in a suit that had a cap and it said Western Union. And she said, "Can I help you?" And he said, "I have a telegram here for a Miss Daniel." My mother and Aunt Adeline and Aunt Lorraine all stood up because they were the three sisters who were married to three brothers. And Stella said, "Which one?" The boy looked confused, and then he looked down and said, "A Ms. Marshall Daniel." And my Aunt Lorraine burst into tears. That was the notification by the government that he was missing in action. And so for 3 to 4 months, we did not know that he had survived the crash or what had happened. But miraculously, he did survive, and all 4 of the men came home from that terrible war. And yes, we learned what war was. There's a picture taken summer of 1943, which shows Hubbard and Grace Daniel sitting in chairs in front of their house, and Aunt Gladys is standing beside Grandpa, and I'm standing back behind them, and they are holding the 3 new babies that were born after the war started. John Daniel is the first Daniel boy. He's sitting in Grandpa Hubbard's lap, and Grandma's holding Maureen Daniel, my sister, and Dee Dee Daniel, Lawrence Daniel's oldest child. They had this picture made to send to the dads who were overseas. I guess most of my school memories happened with knowing that we walked everywhere. Of course, during the war, everything was rationed. You walked. And the only time we rode was on a Saturday. If we would walk to town, and Mother would put Gladys and I in the movie house to see a cowboy or Superman or whatever, one of those serials. She'd go across the street and buy groceries at the M System. And then when the show was over, we would go across and meet her, and we had 3 sacks of groceries for $5, and we would each carry one, and we would get on the bus and ride home, because she could ride for a dime, and if the kids were under 12, they could ride for a nickel each. And so for 20 cents, we got to ride home instead of walking with the groceries. We had a long ride all the way around town to get to where it came back close to where we lived. But that was our walk, any place we went besides walking. We did walk to school every day. We lived on 11th Street, and the school was on 18th, about 3 blocks south, 3 blocks away. So a total of about 12 blocks that we walked to school and back. And did that every day, except on Thursdays during the war. I had one job, and that was to walk from there on up to 22nd Street to my Grandma Daniel's house because she had a cow. And, everything was rationed. You couldn't get butter or anything like that. And she churned on Thursdays, and she would have it ready and give me a glass of buttermilk when I got there, and then she would give me a big block of butter to take home to Mother. So once I got that butter, I had to almost run home so it would not melt before I got there with it. That was a memory of something about the war, as well as us working in the Victory Garden after school where we would pull weeds because we grew our own vegetables as the food was going to the troops. In school, I loved reading, and I learned to read pretty well and enjoyed it. And I think I've been gifted with a really great brain by God because I have a good memory and I'm able to retain a lot of things that I read. And I think if there was that time, there was no such thing as gifted and talented classes, but the principal of our school and our teachers recognized that I got through with my work real soon, and I was reading a lot and all that. And in the 6th grade, Ms. Harris, who was the principal, called. In fact, they said, Ms. Harris, the teacher said, Ms. Harris wants you to come to her office. So I thought, what have I done, She said, I have a job for you. You're getting through with your work so fast. I want to teach you to run the film projector. And then when I need you to show a film for the 2nd grade or the 1st grade or one of the other grades, I can call you out of class and you can go down and show that 15 to 30 minute movie or whatever it is that the teacher has ordered to help teach your class. That was one of those old projectors that you had to thread through the film through it, and then she even showed me if it catches on fire, stop it immediately and how to cut it and splice the film together, finish it off. And so about 3 or 4 times every week, I would get called to one or the other classrooms to show some kind of a film. And I guess I got extra training in science and history and stuff like that because of that. I did enjoy reading so much, though, that my teacher in 6th grade said, there's a state contest going on, and if you can read 25 books during the year, you'll get a certificate from the state of Texas. And so I did that, and I earned that certificate. And my grandma Hulda said to Mama, that girl reads so much, she's going to hurt her eyes. And, that's kind of the way people thought then. But I really enjoyed reading, and I still do. Now I do a lot of reading from my Bible. Our summer vacations were with family because we had no car. We'd take the bus sometimes to Brady, where we had extended cousins and aunts and uncles, and stay 2 or 3 days and visit. And there was always in June a family reunion at the Brady Park, which would sometimes number 100 people or more. My grandpa Gus was one of 15 children, 12 being raised grown, and there was lots of cousins. I don't know. I also played softball, and I enjoyed that. And then through the church, I went to camps a couple of summers, and that was fun. But there was no such thing as a family vacation like people take now because our dad wasn't here. And when he came home, the family began to grow more, and then it was all he could do to work to keep our family going with food, clothes, and socks and shoes. And by 1947, there was 5 of us. Maureen born in 43, Bobby in 45, and Andy in 47. In elementary school, there were 6 elementary schools in San Angelo, and they had what they called the Little Olympics. Each of those had like a field day, and they competed against each other. And that was my first time to know about cheerleaders. They didn't have girls' races. It was just the boys that were competing at that time. But the girls got to be cheerleaders, and so I became a cheerleader in 5th and 6th grade for Little Olympics. I remember going at 4th grade, and Stephen F. Austin, who was one of the other schools, had a little runner in yellow shorts that had black hair, and he was winning everything. And I did not know it until years later. That turned out to be somebody that was very important in my life, a band named Ted Babb. When I went to junior high, I went out for cheerleader because I'd already learned to cheer, and I was chosen. It was San Angelo Junior High at that time because there was only one in the town. And that was for the first 2 years, 7th and 8th grade. But they were building another junior high on the west part of town because of the population growth. And it was ready for the last year, so my 9th grade year, I was not at San Angelo Junior High, I was at Thomas Edison Junior High, although it was actually the same building. But that was a lot of fun. I did enjoy being a cheerleader, and it gave me an outing because I was supposed to be at every football game and every basketball game, and Daddy and Mom would see that I got there some way. I enjoyed something else that happened in 9th grade. I learned to square dance. And that square dance was something that they did extra, and we had an exhibition team of 4 couples that would dance on assemblies and stuff for the rest of the school. My partner was a young guy named Harvey Mikulik. I met him that year because that was the first year that he came to school in San Angelo. And Harvey lived near Wall, Texas, in a community called Fairview, and had gone to a school that only went through 8th grade. And then they had the choice of going to Wall High School or San Angelo. But most of the kids in Fairview picked San Angelo because it was a bigger school and they thought they would have more opportunities. And so Harvey and I made a good team. We learned to dance and well, and by the end of that year and the beginning of the next year, I started actually dating him. He was the first, I guess, dates that I had, and most of the dates were going to local dance halls on Saturday night. There was one at Rowena, and there was one at Wall, there was one at Eola, and he would pick me up, and we would go dancing, and then he'd bring me back home. And that was the extent of our dates. And that was continued on as sophomores. I did go out for cheerleader, and I was elected sophomore cheerleader at San Angelo High School. And I enjoyed that very much, and we got to ride on the bus with the band to football games out of town and basketball and all that. So I had a transportation as cheerleader to go to all those things, and also cheerleaders got in free, so it didn't cost me anything. Well, it was that year that San Angelo Bobcats won district, and that's when I met this little boy that had been in the Yellow Sharks named Ted Babb. They had just finished winning district, or maybe it was by district they won, but anyway, football season was over. And as a cheerleader, I had the last period for study hall, because we'd have to get out early sometimes to leave for the football game. West Texas, your game might be 2 or 3 hours away. And so I was sitting in study hall, and 2 young men came in, and one of them sat down in front of me. The dark-headed guy turned around and grinned at me and said, "Will you marry me?" I was taken aback. I said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm Ted Babb." And I thought, well, I know there was a Ted Babb on the football team, but I don't know who you were, And he said, "I was on the football team, but I'm not tall enough to play basketball. And anyway, I enjoy running more, and I'm on the track team. So I have to come in here for a couple or 3 days while they get the boys that are going to basketball started, and then they'll come after us, and we'll be lifting weights and whatever. But I'm serious. Will you marry me?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know you," And so he turned around, and in a few minutes he turned back around and gave me this poem. "Boogers and snot mixed in a pot will make you grow a whole lot." I thought, who is this? And when we left, he said, I'll see you tomorrow. I'll be asking a question again." I said, "Okay, go on, Well, he did come back in, and he came in, and he'd written me another poem, and he'd also drawn me a picture. And I won't tell you what they were. That was pretty weird. But anyway, when he left that day, well, it was funny because I said, "What position did you play on the team?" He said, "I played tailback." I said, "What does a tailback do?" He said, "Well, when you get off the bench, the coach says, 'Get your tailback.'" He said, really, he was a tackling dummy. He was the one that they practiced tackling on. But that can tell you his sense of humor. Somebody that he had not met before, and how he played with me. Later on in years, he said, "You're so gullible." And I guess I was. Well, he said that day when he left, "I'm going to ask you, and I want the answer tomorrow." He never came back to study hall, because they had gone by then, and they had started their track. I didn't see him again because he was a senior, and I had no classes near him. I didn't see him again until the spring. The basketball team had also done very well. These same guys that won by district in football was now playing in Abilene for a district championship. And so everybody from San Angelo was going over there for the game. And the cheerleaders were there, of course, and we were down on the floor at the quarter time and all that, giving our cheers. And who walks in but Ted Babb and his friend Joel Howerton. They had driven over from San Angelo to Abilene for the game. And of course, he finds a seat right in front of where I stood as cheerleader, and he would wave at me as I was trying to do my cheers and look up in the stands, and he's waving. And after it was over, he found me down on the floor, and he said, how did you like that? I said, I loved it that we won. And he said, then give me a hug for winning. And so I gave him a little hug, and he said, I want to ask you something. I said, what's that? He said, would you go with me tomorrow night to a birthday party? I said, a birthday party? Yes, he said, my friend Hal Whitsitt's girlfriend, Judy Mahudik, is having her 16th birthday, and her parents are giving her a party at their house. And Hal has invited me, and he said I could bring a date. I'd like you to go with me. I said, well, I'll see. I'll have to ask Mother and Daddy, because I didn't really know him that well. The reason that I agreed to go, because actually back when Lent started, Harvey had said, we won't be able to have a date for a while, and because I'm giving you up for Lent. And I thought, okay, that's a good Catholic, but I wasn't dating anybody then, so I agreed to go with Ted. And then we went to the party, the birthday party, and it was fun. And when he asked me to go to church with him the next day, I said, okay, I will. It was First Christian Church in San Angelo, and he said, I go to Sunday school and church, so it'll be early. And I said, well, I will have to ask my parents, so call me in the morning to see if they say okay, and if so, then I'll go with you. So he called me, and I said, yes, Dad said if I wanted to, I could go with you. And so he picked me up about 9:15, and we went to Sunday school. The lesson that day was one of the letters from Luke, one of the letters from Paul, that he talked about people, his experience in bringing people to Christ. But the teacher said, he always made his own way while he was preaching. Does anybody know what his occupation was? And looked around the class, and no one said anything. And then she looked at me, and maybe I don't know why, but she said, do you know? And I said, well, I think he was a tent maker. And she said, that is correct. Probably what she did not know is that from the time I was 12 years old, I had been in an extensive Bible study with what they called the Corps Cadets at the Salvation Army, where my parents went. It was a 6-year study of the Bible, and started on it was every Sunday night. And Daddy made sure that I went to that because he always taught Sunday school. Actually, for about 60 years, he taught Sunday school. The next year, as a junior in high school, dated Ted and Harvey. I go dancing with Harvey and movie with Ted. Ted had graduated in 51 as being a senior, and had taken me to the prom as his date. And I went to his graduation service and all, and continued to date him some, but also dated Harvey. And then as he went to San Angelo Junior College, he was still in town. But he worked at the drive-in theater, so sometimes dates with Ted was him picking me up, and I would sit in the car and watch the movie while he was taking tickets at the entrance of the drive-in theater. And then when halftime came, he would be through because they didn't charge if you got there after halftime of the movie. He would go by the concession stand and get popcorn, Cokes or something and come to the car, and we'd watch the rest of the movie. And then he would take me home because we both had school the next day. And that was often our dates. And Harvey's were dancing on Saturday night. And other things that I did that were very enjoyable came through school was that I was in the Tri-High Y, which was a part of the, I think, sponsored maybe by YMCA or something like that. But anyway, it was clubs. The boys had High Y clubs and the girls had Tri-High Y clubs, they were called. And one of the things that the sponsored every year was a youth and government in Austin, where the ones that were chosen actually went to the legislature and pretended to be the legislators. And I was picked by my Tri-High Y group to be a representative of them as a state representative. To do that, I had to work with the local state representative, who was the man named Penrose Metcalf, and he would come to school and work with us that were going to give bills and helping us to learn how to research, to find out a bill that really was needed, then how it might come to be, and that sort of thing. And he worked with about 4 or 5 of us that were going to represent our different Tri-High Ys and High Ys. So when we went to Austin, I actually gave my presentation in the House of Representatives, and when I finished, the person in charge, who was Speaker of the House there, asked if there were any questions, and there was only one question. And he asked, and I answered it, and then no further questions will be up for consideration, you know. And somebody said, that was strange because most everybody got 5 or 6 questions. I said, well, I was ready to answer, you know. Well, anyway, when they made the announcements for who were the winners and all, they called my name as the best presentation in the House of Representatives. That everything I had said made it so clear what the bill would be that there weren't any objections to it. And I won an award, and my award was an 8-volume set, a first edition of the writings of Sam Houston, which was a very valuable resource, and I used it often through high school when I would have some kind of maybe a paper I had to write, or with needed something historical in it. I had those, but they were deteriorating at home, and later my son, who was involved with Masonic Lodge in Waco, Texas, said, Mom, you should put those in the library so they'll be taken care of. And so I gave them to him to donate, and they are now located at the Lee Lockwood Museum in Waco, Texas. The other thing that I enjoyed was volleyball. I began playing volleyball as a junior, and I was on the student council, and with all that, I stayed busy. My summers were busy because I always worked in the summertime. I started when I was about 12, and I was babysitting. I didn't get paid for babysitting my own brothers and sisters, but occasionally I would have a little cousin or some that they wanted me to look after, and they'd pay me a little bit. And I had one other thing that I did that I made a little money. There was this lady that lived behind us on 12th Street, across the alley from our house, named Miss Fambro. And Miss Fambro had developed rheumatoid arthritis, so she didn't get around good. And so Red, her husband, said to my mother, your big girls ought to come over here and help her, and I'll pay them a little. So Mother sent us on Saturday mornings, after we did our chores at her house, which was dusting and different things, she sent me first to Miss Fambro's. And I would wash dishes and cook their lunch and all that. And when I'd leave, Red would give me a quarter. And so I started saving the money I made babysitting and that, and because I needed later have a little extra when I would go on cheerleading things. And so that was about the first two. But by the time I finished 8th grade, I got to my first job, a real job, where I got my Social Security number. I became a soda jerk at Perkins Drug. That was downtown San Angelo. And I would walk to work, or Daddy would drop me off if I had early hours. And then usually I would spend that dime to ride home on the bus because I was so tired from working, standing on my feet all day. That was a very interesting job. I did learn how to make great milkshakes, banana splits, how to serve people, be nice to them. Maybe I might even get a tip occasionally. But it wasn't just waiting on people, it was keeping everything clean, sanitized, going to the back warehouse to refill the Coke machine when they ran out of Coke syrup, and because it was a fountain, or Dr. Pepper or whatever, and picking up big containers of ice cream and bringing them back to serve, and then waiting on tables. And I actually learned where you could put cups and saucers here. You could carry about 3 if you were careful. And because they had tables to wait on at the back part of the thing. And that was interesting. So I worked there. And the next summer, after my sophomore year of high school, I worked again, and that was the summer after I had met Ted, and Ted had graduated, and he went off to South Dakota for the summer. So I worked a lot, and I only heard from him once, and I got a little disillusioned, thinking that he'd forgotten me. But when he came home, he said it was because they didn't do anything but work. And when they got there to bale, they were baling hay. They had 40,000 bales to bale, and when they left there, they had baled 160,000, and they still had 40,000 more to bale. So he said that was all we did was work, but he was working to make money for college because he was going to go on to San Angelo College. Well, then, like I said, then that year, I dated he and Harvey both. And by the end of my junior year, my feelings were turning more towards Ted. And I quit dating Harvey, and I started dating Ted as my steady beau. And I worked again that summer at, I had worked 2 summers, and then, yes, so after that year that when I went to work at Perkins, Mr. Perkins said, "We need someone else to help you. We've really gotten more busy." And he said, "Do you know of anybody?" And I said, "Well, my sister Gladys is 2 years behind me. She would like to have a job, but hasn't been hired anywhere. And she's the same age I was when I started here 2 years ago." "Oh, well, if she's your sister, that'll be fine. We'll hire her." Gladys and I were cut from two different cloths. I love her dearly, and we've always been close. But she was not the same as I am. There are a lot of stories I could tell about her, but I'll tell this funny one. She came, and met him and all that, and so she worked with me that day, and I showed her where everything was and how to do it and what to do, and yes, and so after till about the third day, and the second day, we ran out of Coke, and so I know where it is. She said, I can do that. I can go get the Coke for you while you're still waiting on people." I said, "Okay, well, they're heavy, so be careful." So she goes back, and in a minute I see her coming out with a gallon thing of Coke syrup, the syrup, which was heavy. And behind the bar, there was a little step up of slats, so you weren't stepping just, on the concrete all the time. She missed that step and fell flat and broke. The bottle hit and broke, and the syrup ran all down the wooden slats and in through the holes all over. And that was quite a mess to clean up glass and syrup and all. But it was an accident, and Mr. Perkins was, well, that could happen to anybody, she just missed her step. And so we'll give her another chance, So we got that all cleaned up, and it took me half a day to clean up all that syrup and all that. Well, the next day, we go to work, and this man always came in about 10:30, a lawyer that works at the bank building a half block down, and he was always in a suit and tie, said Hart, Shafter, and Marks on it, which was a famous suit. And he would sit down and order a cup of coffee, and Mr. Perkins would come out from the pharmacy in his white coat and sit down and take a break and have coffee with him, and they would visit. And he'd light up a cigar, the other man, with his coffee. And I always waited on them. And I just said to Gladys, "I'll wait on them. I know what they want." Someone else came in, a young man, sat down at the counter, and she said, "I'll get him." I said, "Okay." And so I kind of listened, and he said, "A strawberry milkshake." She said, "I think I can do this." So I watched it. She got the ice cream, and she put the strawberry stuff in it, and then she turned around, and it had one of those mixers that you pushed the metal can up onto, and then it would whirl, but it had a lip that you had to catch that metal can on that lip, or it wouldn't, it'd start spinning, but it wouldn't stay on. And I had cautioned her about that. She thought she had it caught. Well, she pushed that up there, and I was watching her, and then she let it go, and that thing started whirling, and it started coming, and it was coming around and shooting strawberry milkshake all across the mirror behind the bar, and I ducked, and it went over me and between Mr. Perkins and the lawyer, spraying strawberry milkshake all over Mr. Perkins' white shirt and the other man, Mr. Kerr was his name, his suit, and dripping off of his cigar. And Gladys picked up the bar rag that we always wiped things with and took his cigar and wiped his cigar off and stuck it back in his mouth. And the missile, the ice cream missile, shot on across the room, wiped out the whole display of perfume on the other side of the drugstore, and finally came to land out in the floor. And Mr. Perkins said, "I'm going to call your dad." And I said, "Okay." I figured we're both going to be fired. But Daddy said, he was very nice. He said, when he called, he said, "Mr. Daniel?" He said, "Yes, this is Mr. Perkins. About that younger daughter of yours." Daddy said, "What'd she do now?" And he said, "I think she's too young for this job." So Daddy came after her. But that was funny to this day. When we tell it, we laugh, we have tears come in our eyes. We laugh so hard. And Gladys said, "Well, you ducked. If I hadn't ducked, it would have hit me in the head." And that wouldn't have happened all that. It was so funny. I laugh. I have to think about it. I can see it in my head to this day. That was an interesting summer. Well, that was a funny story about Gladys, and that was funny. Some good things happened that year too, though. And one was the birth of another baby in the family, number 6 for Mother and Dad, and I was taken to the hospital by my date, Ted Babb, to see my new baby brother, Dwayne, who was born in 51. And then, I guess 52, who was born in 52. I also got my driver's license, and then I was able to drive Mother around because she had never learned to drive. And that gave me another thing to do. And since Gladys wasn't able to work at Perkins, she got to go help Miss Fambro and make a quarter. So that was interesting. Then my senior year came along, and I was cheerleader again. This was my actually co-head cheerleader with Sharon Burton, who was the other junior that we had been cheerleaders the year before. So they made us co-head cheerleaders instead of just one head cheerleader. And we got to go on to the games. In the meantime, a lot of the really heavy and good players had all graduated, and so it was, although we did our best cheering, we hardly won a game that year. The Bobcats fell down. Later on, when we had a class reunion, they wanted us to buy tickets for the lottery, and when they came out with it, we had bought 40 tickets, and only one person won $1. So they said that was kind of like our senior year. We didn't win but one game. Anyway, that was an interesting year also. I was very busy. I was elected president of the student council. I was in the swing and turn square dance club for exhibitions. Besides my cheering, I was on the district volleyball team where we actually lettered that year in volleyball. And I got a patch for my jacket. And then sang one semester, the last half of the year, in the San Angelo High School Choir in the alto section. And just continued with all that. And also, I worked part-time on Saturdays at Perkins, or whenever I could, if someone needed off, to continue making money. And I had bought myself a typewriter. It was one of those portable ones that, click, click, click. And I actually typed the thesis, for one of the teachers who was getting her master's in English. And she said she would pay me for it. And it was so you had the front page, and she needed 2 carbons. So it had 3 pieces of paper with the carbon in between. Well, if you made a mistake, then you had to erase the carbons as well as. And she gave me a whopping 10 cents a page. And I think I ended up making close to $10 the whole thing for typing that whole thesis and the carbon papers. But anyway, I could do that at home at night when I wasn't studying. I did study. I enjoyed school. I always did. And I loved my senior English teacher. He was hard-nosed, but he really taught us grammar and made the class interesting. And a funny thing happened in that he also taught me a life lesson, because he said, we're going to read Lady Macbeth, and we're going to read it like a play. And this one girl raised her hand, and she said, Mr. Windsor, I'll be Lady Macbeth. And he said, you may be the first witch. And I laughed, and he said, and Virginia, you may be the second witch. It made me realize, don't laugh at somebody else's mistake. So I learned a lesson in that. And when we went back for our 20th class reunion, he was there, and I told him, I learned that lesson from you about laughing when someone else gets reprimanded. So I think that was something that helped me through life. I graduated 3rd in my class. It was Mr. Windsor's class that I made an A- in the last semester. I was in running for valedictorian or salutatorian, and that A- that I made dropped me down to 3rd place in the class. But the girl that won was probably more intelligent. She turned out to be a professor at TCU, so that was okay. She was smarter than I was anyway. I loved my school, and I loved being cheerleader. And Ted was graduating that same year I graduated from high school. He finished his 2nd year at Angelo State, or SAC as it was called then, St. Angelo College. And he had done well also. He studied agriculture and was in the ag team, and he actually there's a picture of him in the yearbook that they won an award at the Houston Fat Stock Show, the team from SAC, for the best judges in the animal contest. And so he would tease me that that was why he picked me. He was such a good judge of characters, of pigs. Anyway, he graduated and I graduated. He took me to my senior prom as I had gone with him to his. And then that summer, he went to work part-time as a carpenter to make money to go to Texas A&M in the fall, because he intended to become an agricultural missionary, and he was going to go to A&M and do that, and through the church to go help people learn how to do animals, keep them and grow crops and all that. So he was making money to go on to college to finish in A&M. And his brother Bob had a real low ID for drafting. And so instead of being drafted, he joined the Air Force. And I left Ted with his car, which was a little English Ford. And he would drive that over to me at night for our dates. And when school started, he left for A&M. And I went to San Angelo Junior College myself on a Robert Massey scholarship. And I worked that summer. I got a job after high school working for a department store that held ladies' wear and alterations. It was called Nelson's. And first of all, they just had me waiting on people, and then they had me starting to do the cashier. And then at Christmas time, I wrapped packages. And after that, he put me in the office to help learn some of the accounting with that lady. And then he would send me to the cash stand to lunchtime to relieve that lady. But he said, he liked me. Mr. Nelson said, you're a good worker and you're intelligent and you can do anything I tell you. So that was pretty good because I could go to college in the morning and go to work in the afternoon and take the bus home when they closed at night. And Ted was at A&M, and he would come home on weekends when he could. He would hitchhike. And one weekend, he said he was standing in the rain on Highway 6 where he had gotten a ride from College Station that far, and the guy had let him out there and looking for a ride, and this car drove up, and it was a lady, and he was in his uniform because he was a part of the Corps at A&M. And she said, you need a ride? And he said, yes. Where are you going? He said, I need a ride to San Angelo. And he said, I was dripping wet, you know. And she said, well, I'm going to Odessa. Can you drive? And he said, yes. She said, all right, if you'll drive, because I need to sleep. I'm so tired. Then you take me to San Angelo that far and go right to your house, wherever you want to go, and then wake me up. She didn't know him at all, but he was in his Aggie uniform, and so she trusted him. So he said, I didn't know her or the car or anything, but got in, and he drove all the way. And then when he drove into the driveway at his mother's house, they heard the car, and they came, look, Ted, you know, and he said, whose car were you driving? He said, I don't know. He's some lady going to Odessa, but that's how he made it that weekend. And he did come home the weekend that we were having a dance for the little Lambertal sorority that I belonged to in a college, and took me as my date because I was not dating anyone else then. And then he brought me to A&M for my first football game for a college other than the junior college's game that I'd ever attended, and taught me an interesting lesson there about the Aggies that I didn't know, that anytime they score, they get to kiss their date. And if they make a touchdown, if they make an extra point, they get to kiss them again because they scored again. And so Aggies made a touchdown, and he grabbed me and gave me a big kiss. And I was shocked, but when I looked around, everybody else was kissing too. Well, that was that semester. And when January came, he didn't have enough money to go back. So he went back to work, trying to make enough to get back in school. And he got drafted. he came to my house. He called me and he said, "Don't go to school today. I need to see you." And so he drove over and he dropped into my lap the letter that said, "Uncle Sam needs you." And he said, "Can we get married before I leave?" I said, "Well," and he said, "I have to be there in 2 weeks." And I said, "Well, you'll have to ask my dad." So he asked Daddy. Daddy said, "Well, I was expecting this sometime, but just not quite this fast. But if y'all think you can get it together and that's what you want, I'll agree." Because he liked Ted. And so that was on Saturday before Easter that year. We went to church the next day, and then we stayed and talked to the preacher. And we set up the wedding for the following Sunday. And on Monday, we were at the courthouse to get we got our blood test. Took 3 days to get it before you could get your marriage license. So the blood test came back. Neither one of us had any disease, and we got our marriage license. And on Sunday, the 11th of April, 1954, I married Ted Babb, Theodore L. Babb. And this past year, I would have been married 70 years to him.